Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Well, we're continuing our Evil Elite series where I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes as the Great Awakening continues. And we've got plenty of news to get through, including this fantastic podcast with Dr. Susan Humphreys on Joe Rogan this week, where they really dived deep into a lot of the older vaccine background. And it's great to see that again, is getting out on some of the top podcasts in the world. But let's start off again with some of the stuff around child trafficking, mind control. I keep talking about how important it is to understand what's going on with Epstein and all the elites as that slowly comes to light. But this is child actor Matthew Lawrence talking about when he was in Mrs. Doubtfire and Boy Meets World, and how he was fired from his agency for refusing to strip for a Hollywood director who promised to turn him into a movie hero. So we have more and more of these people now coming forward, shedding light on exactly what happens in Hollywood, the music industry, as well as the corruption in politics. Ultimately, it's all run by the same cabal, and it's just fantastic to see all these whistleblowers finally having the confidence to come forward. And this was a cryptic Instagram post by Justin Bieber, who, again, many have seen his different actions over the years suggest that he himself went through some pretty horrible stuff. But obviously he's got hundreds of millions of followers. But this is the post he put up with the shipping containers and children, and this people are starting to join together all these dots. And if you've been down this rabbit hole for many years and watched all the documentaries, you'll know how important it is and what he's trying to tell us. So it's great to think that this sort of stuff is coming out. And we also have been getting, leaked documents and things proving that a lot of these people in the music industry, particularly a lot of rappers and these, newer people that have risen to fame, are controlled CIA operatives and pushing these messages to our youth. Destabilizing culture and pushing the narratives that they want, and so on. So this all ties in with long history of dark activities from the CIA, and again MK Ultra. It's so important to understand, because not only is it happening to these individuals on a more severe scale, but this whole mind control thing is now prominent throughout all forms of media, Hollywood, music, and industry, where people don't realize that what they've been told is kind of a form of brainwashing to form what they want you to believe is true, and not ever be able to question anything, think critically, and look outside the box. So these numbers are staggering in these documents, and just like the number of missing children annually, it's just staggering numbers when you look into it all. That's just never on the news, so most people are just completely unaware that this is happening. And Jake Shields is a great one for calling all this out, and I think a lot of I know some of you have been down this rabbit hole for many years. Others, this is all new, and the idea of satanic cults running the world and doing these horrible things to kids just seems too ridiculous to be true. But as I said, we've got so many of these people that have escaped these cults, survived, telling their stories, finally getting out there, going on large podcasts and so on. And when you see these stories like this one from The Atlantic, just saying how it's all fake and there's nothing to this, and then you see the owner of The Atlantic with Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's partner in crime, is it any wonder that this stuff doesn't ever get out through the news, which is all controlled? And you have to dig a bit deeper and do your own research to get to the truth here. So we do have some high-profile politicians trying to call out all this child trafficking stuff and push back against the New World Order, the globalist agenda, such as Carlin Georgescu, who I've covered many times now, in Romania, and all the stuff that's going on there with the elections. And now we have Marine Le Pen, who's been pushing back and being banned from running for president. And we got the news that she could even be barred from politics altogether and possibly imprisoned for going against the narrative. And this is what we're starting to see now, where elections aren't even elections anymore. It's just installing the next puppet from the West or whatever, globalists, to push the agenda. And a lot of these people themselves are probably been mind controlled and gone through these systems, been part of these occult families over the years, and are really just puppets. So I think the number one issue that we're really looking at short term is this push by the globalists for World War III. So Zelensky has rejected these peace deal that Trump proposed with the minerals deal and so on, and they're really now trying to team up with Europe to get Europe dragged into that war in Ukraine, while America seems to be aligning itself more with Israel, dragging everyone else into, World War III and prioritizing them over others. So this is something we have to watch just so closely. This Russia has now accused UK and France of directing these strikes against sensitive energy sites of theirs with Ukraine and whatnot. So this is just an absolute tinderbox. It's such dangerous times, and I think the elites really do want to drag us into World War III. So I hope cooler heads prevail. And we've also seen one of Vladimir Putin's limousines erupted in flames, a big explosion in a street in Moscow, part of his official fleet. So look, Russia has previously warned that any assassination attempt on Putin would trigger a nuclear response. So, these is just insane headlines that I'm reading. And, it does feel like we're just living in a simulation. I can understand why a lot of people think that with how crazy the world has become. Let's get over to the UK, where they're openly talking about conscription. And again, I think this all ties in with that whole agenda, the great replacement theory, wanting to send young men off to die. It's just insane stuff that's going on. But this is 6 police officers rocking up, arresting 2 parents in front of their children for complaining about their local school in a WhatsApp group. This is just that Orwellian nightmare that we've been warning about for so long that's now on our doorsteps. People in Scotland receiving letters saying they could be breaking the law if they pray in their own house, if it's within sight, or could even be heard within a zone. Who can believe that this stuff is real? That in these white Christian-based countries, it's now illegal to pray, and this all ties into that immigration that we see becoming a real issue, and the rise of violent crime and the prioritizing of different religions over Christianity or just white people in their own countries and so on. But this is Keir Starmer talking about the problem in England. And as I said, this is white people now are going to get tougher sentences from judges as of Tuesday as well. He's looking to ban ninja swords. And as someone's rightly pointed out here, look, if ninja swords were the problem, Japan would be leading the world in all this violent crime and sword and knife incidents that we are seeing. So once again, band-aid solutions and not getting to the root of the problem. And as I covered in last week's episode, British people are now a minority in most cities and places across their own country. And again, this is going to happen in Australia. They're really pushing to accelerate that here, and it's an invasion, and we're starting to see just people in positions of power pushing this agenda further, taking away the rights of the citizens that have been there for a long time and prioritizing others. And as I've said, if you move to a country and don't integrate and start pushing all your beliefs on other people, I just don't see how anyone can say that's common sense and fair. We should respect each other's beliefs and get along. But once you start to prioritize others, say that you're not allowed to do this, that, or the other, you can see how this creates all that division, and just chaos. And people have been warning about this for a long time. This is a speech that did the rounds again this week from 60 years ago, talking about the great replacement through mass immigration and how it's going to happen. And now it's effectively happened for the most part. And yes, there are some countries like Sweden that have started to reverse immigration and deport people. But in other places, unless that happens soon, it's almost too far gone from saving. So last week I spoke about how Conor McGregor announced that he wants to run for a leadership role in Ireland, and particularly with that focus on immigration, saying he's going to end it. Well, he soon took Trump up on this invitation to visit the White House, and he came out later on saying his full support for Israel. So once again, just these 180s that people are doing, it's really exposing who is controlling all these puppets and who's in control at the top of this cabal with the Rothschilds, Israel, the banker cabal. Okay, so this is British Steel announcing it will close its 2 blast furnaces in Scunthorpe, ending all steel production in the UK for after 150 years. So the country that started the Industrial Revolution will no longer produce steel. I spoke about last week in Australia how they signed that treaty, agreeing with the globalists to gut manufacturing and start even importing food from other places when we could have produced plenty just domestically for ourselves. So people are seeing the blueprint for the globalist cabal to make everyone reliant on this global system. It gives them more control and power. Now, obviously, in a cost of living crisis with immigration through the roof, it's getting harder and harder to buy or rent. And I've spoken about this in previous episodes, how BlackRock and these big funds are now buying up properties. And so now not only are you competing with others, you're competing with these people that basically have an endless money supply. So just insane stuff that this is all happening at once, and accelerating. And if this is a famous quote that Senator Bubbett actually shared again this week. So talking about if people understood fractional reserve banking, there would be a revolution by tomorrow morning. And it's the same really for BlackRock on that. They effectively have an infinite amount of assets to borrow against and buy up all the farmland, all the houses, all businesses, mergers, and just create this totalitarian one world control system. So we're starting to see that stress appear in America as well. Over 6 million Americans are now behind on their mortgage. Delinquencies have spiked to 11%, the highest in years, and this surpassed the peak during the GFC back here after the 2009 financial crisis as well. So everyone's starting to feel the pinch. But let's get into some more of the stuff that has been happening in the Middle East. So we're continuing to hear stories, just these horrible stories of the genocide that is going on in Gaza at the hands of Israel. This is the Red Cross that sent these 16 ambulance crews and first responders to help, and all of them have been, massacred in this war crime. And once again, the media is just completely silent on all this, which shows you who controls the media. So Thomas Massey has been pushing for this bill for elected officials to reveal who holds dual citizenship to show their allegiance to these foreign nations as well, which I think is just a sensible, common sense thing to do when we know the influence that AIPAC have over US politics and politics all over the West and globally really now. And we're seeing it in Australia too, where Peter Dutton and Albo are coming out and just saying how they're going to prioritise Israel and these wars overseas, and they're even ready to send troops and talking about conscription here too, which is wild. But this is Australia's exports to Israel have boomed 20% in a year, so it's no wonder they're staying quiet over this genocide that's happening. Now, why this is really interesting is because China has called on Israel to withdraw from Syria and Lebanon and all these neighbouring countries that they're now starting to drag into this war as part of the Greater Israel Plan and try and drag East and West into World War III. But don't forget, China's our largest trading partner. So if Australia starts to do more support or conscription, all that type of thing, really interesting to see how China's going to react with tariffs. And don't forget, we had those Chinese warships circling the Australian East Coast just a couple of weeks ago as well. I wanted to throw this one in here from Argentinian President Javier Milei, who's ordering the release of all these remaining documents about all the Nazis who fled the country after World War II, including information about Hitler being alive in Argentina after 1945. So most of you have heard about Operation Paperclip, where all those Nazi scientists, many of them involved in horrible experiments, were shipped into America and made their way into positions of power in the CIA, NASA, politics, everything really. So I'm really watching to see what comes out of this announcement as well. Let's get into some Bill Gates stuff here, where he's come out and said, we are no longer going to need humans for most things, and we'll decide, as in the globalists, what we're going to do in terms of growing food and who needs to work and so on. And this all ties in with the work that Bill Gates' dad did as the head of Planned Parenthood as well, which I want to get to next. All part of this global depopulation and complete control that they're clearly now trying to roll out. So this is Planned Parenthood staffs under oath committing these illegal partial abortions. So pretty gross stuff. I don't want to get into this too much, but these people are being caught doing this, and this is the black market for a lot of these horrible crimes, and it all ties back into that child trafficking and the missing children, as well as the stuff going through Planned Parenthood. So important to be aware of. As always, knowledge is power. So let's get into some of the stuff that RFK Jr. has been doing. So he's sent a clear message and cutting a lot of these health expenditures and waste. We see the amount of administrators compared to the amount of physicians, but also look at health outcomes. All this money that's been spent and all this administration, and people are just getting sicker and sicker. It's absolutely not led to a healthier population as well. So I've got to give him credit for that, as well as launching this new sub-agency to specialize in vaccine injuries. But there's plenty of things that he hasn't done that he promised to do on day one as well. And the Trump cabinet continues to appoint people. This is the new CDC director who's been promoting the new combined COVID and flu vaccine, these new strains, updated boosters, blah, blah, blah. So this goes against what was promised, to shed some truth and get the light out there about all the mRNA stuff and the horrible side effects that have been going on. This is Jay Bhattacharya. Sorry, I've absolutely butchered the pronunciation there, but he was on the COVID blacklist on Twitter for his thoughts, and he's been confirmed as the director of NIH. So again, we see this sort of chalk and cheese stuff going on. There's not a clear direction as we were promised. And don't forget, he's also good friends with Peter Thiel, who's absolutely one of the main men ushering in mass surveillance, digital ID, AI governance, and social credit scores, all this absolute dystopia that we've been warning about from the globalists as well, the PayPal mafia, as some people like to call it. Now, this has been trending this week about if RFK is blackmailed because of how he's really pivoted on a lot of these issues and hasn't really called out. And if anything, he's really sucked up and said, Israel and anti-Semitism and all this is, a huge health issue, and he's prioritizing that. A 180, as you would have thought, with the release of the documents about who was behind, the killing of his uncle as well. So it's about to get weird, as Ian Carroll points out here. So this is another one that I'm really watching. If more evidence comes out about just how severe this blackmail is and how they hold all these people hostages, one way or another, we might get some more truth, some more light shed on that issue too. So with Trump's Stargate project, as I've spoken about before, this push for AI to prescribe all these mRNA vaccines for everyone, they're going to say, prevents cancer. I even think they're going to try and maybe replace the old vaccine schedule and just say how great these new mRNA vaccines are and push that on everyone as well. So all this is really important to understand, but it is great to see at the same time the biggest podcast in the world having these experts on who have been trying to get this message out for years. And this is an article here from 1984 just talking about the government's plan to censor anything that goes against it. So any doubts, even if they're well-founded about safeties of vaccines and so on, cannot be allowed to exist. So this is just insane stuff, government documents that are now getting out there finally into the public realm and hopefully waking people up. So she went dived into the history around polio. If you've been down this rabbit hole before, you'll know this is interesting because the definition, the symptoms, all these things have kind of changed over the years. How DDT was being sprayed a lot at the time, particularly in the wheat belts in America, where a lot of these cases first started to show up and mirrored, heavy metal poisonings and other things that affect the nervous system. And now we basically call polio, it's more akin to a Guillain-Barré syndrome. So yeah, watch the podcast, watch documentaries on all this if you haven't already, but it's great to see this getting out. And we've also recently seen some of these leaked docs in the JFK files talking about the history of different diseases and how the Pentagon, CIA, all these agencies were actually confessing to deploy biological agents which would appear to be natural in origin. And Lyme disease in particular is a really fascinating one to look into if you haven't already. A lot of these original vaccines contained all these, contaminants, adjuvants, and so on. Most people are really unaware of all the other things that go into these that are really dangerous. So yeah, fantastic interview. Check it out if you haven't already. Let's get into some of the COVID mRNA stuff. So this is Dr. Mary Bowden, who's been sounding the alarm. She's got 500,000 followers as well. And she's been testing the spike protein IgG antibody levels in patients and finding unvaccinated versus vaccinated here, and just the huge difference. And even these people hadn't received a shot for 3 years. So this was the fear that it stays in the body, continues to produce this spike protein, or we just need more science and evidence around this. But as I've said, there's some good news as well. This is Dr. Pierre Corey talking about the farther out you are from the last one, the better you are. So, don't get any more, obviously, But don't fear either. Fear and stress, as I've said, fasting, nattokinase, the spike protein detox protocol, just being healthy and getting your immune system going. There's plenty of things you can do to clear this out of your body and just get your natural immune system firing as well, so you don't get any of these side effects. But it is insane that these shots are still being given and recommended to babies, 6 months old. The CDC recommended schedule in the US. We have to stop this madness, because even if you believe in the vaccines, which there's plenty of doctors out there that still do, all the evidence, even the corrupt evidence the big pharma put forward, show the risk to reward of vaccinating kids that are 6 months with mRNA against COVID versus the risk of illness or death. It's just completely out of whack. It makes no sense to be pushing these and adding them to the recommended schedule. And we've got all these doctors that are coming forward, particularly in Japan. They're really sounding the whistle on this. That these young kids that are presenting with these different cancers that are only normally common in elderly people, or at least middle-aged people. Insane stuff that we are witnessing. So, we have to stop this madness. Thankfully, we've got 6 states filed to ban mRNA vaccines in humans. I've spoken about how the changes, I think, are only going to come from the local level and the state level, with the banning of fluoride in water, other things we've seen, which we'll get to as well. And this is just one other thing they spoke about in this vaccine, which I've touched on in previous episodes, tying the adjuvants in these that can heighten the immune response to certain things that you consume. So in those rat studies that I've spoken about, where you might eat some peanuts, and some of these vaccines have peanut oil in them, or you might eat some shellfish or whatever it is, and then your body overcompensates by thinking that that's a toxin that needs to be removed. And that's how we've seen this epidemic of childhood allergies to a lot of different things. It's become most apparent in the countries that have the most vaxxers in their schedule. There's plenty of natural things you can do: cinnamon, garlic, just eating healthy, guys. Getting back and eating things that are from nature, common sense stuff that you can do with any really disease that the body has, to get your immune system the best that it can possibly be as well. So, and I do plan to do a dedicated episode on all that as well. This is a good study about in prison, how replacing junk food with whole foods, natural foods, reduce violence by 80%. I think this is all tying into how kids can't concentrate, probably ADD, overdiagnosis, all this stuff. I think we are seeing, more violence and whatever in society as a whole, but I think it all ties back to junk food, all the adjuvants, all the additives, heavy metals, GMOs, all that stuff. We're just not eating natural things anymore. This is another interesting study that came out. About 100% of MS patients' autopsies had parasites in their brain and spinal fluid. So plenty of cultures outside the West are aware of parasites, and their diet and a lot of their fasting and things that they do as part of their maybe religious practices are good at cleansing our parasites, but we really don't do it in the West. Now, more people are asking about ivermectin, and again, I'd love to see some more just more science around this as well. But this is Arkansas now making ivermectin available over the counter. So it is pretty readily available. A lot of people have been getting into it, and we're seeing some reports that it's good for parasites, maybe even cancer stuff. But again, we just need time and more of this truth to get out there. But it is interesting to see that some places are now making that over the counter. This is over to Australia now, where we had Dr. Maya Lee had her license taken away, and she was prescribing ivermectin. So it is just really sad to see doctors that really thought they were doing the right thing, had success treating their patients, didn't injure anyone, and they're still being targeted. And remember, we saw Dr. William Bay win his case recently for speaking out against COVID, but we're still seeing the establishment criminalize these doctors for doing what they think is best in their opinion for their patients. More madness in Australia here. I spoke about how Billboard Chris was coming to Australia to take on some of these censorship cases. And he's been fined and was threatened with arrest and removed from public for just holding this sign that's saying children can't consent to puberty blockers as well. So as I said, I'm interested to watch how his case goes here. It's going to be a landmark decision either way. Some more health news here. 23andMe have won permission from a judge to sell the information of customers' medical records and ancestry-related data. So a lot of these ancestry programs and companies, we've got more and more coming out about how they're just selling on your data, and really that privacy-related element, and really scary with everything that's going on where they're talking about genetic and tailored AI, mRNA vaccines, and genetically modified foods. Genetics is going to have a really important role to play as we go further down the rabbit hole as to really what is going on in the elite's plan as well. And as I mentioned before, this ties into genetically modified food, just their obsession with modifying things and getting away from nature and everything that works so well for so long. So the WEF have now turned their evil agenda to food, and this is great to see Senator Malcolm Roberts exposing the WEF's war on humanity. You control the food supply, you control the money, control the energy, you control the people. And you just think about how reliant we've become on in this modern day matrix that we live on. What percent of people do you know that would know how to live in a situation where they need to get their own food, or if the power goes out for even just a few days? Can you imagine the chaos that would ensue? And a lot of people have been saying about, well, is that maybe one of the playbooks that they're going to push, these power outages and so on. So start to make yourself less reliant on the system. Have a plan B to get out somewhere in nature for a few days if something bad happens. Just common sense things to put yourself ahead of the majority if something bad ever happens. And hopefully it doesn't, and common sense prevails. People unite rather than standing against each other, and realize who the bad guys are, the cabal at the top. I mentioned the honeybees and some of the new studies that were coming out showing how elevated the levels of aluminium and heavy metals are in their bodies now. And scientists are now warning that honeybee colonies, which have already been plummeting, could plummet by 70% this year, the largest decline in history. And of course, we need bees to cross-pollinate natural plants. But this is not what the globalists want. They want you having to buy Monsanto's patented seeds every year. And even farmers themselves have become reliant on this system. Think about that insanity, that farmers now, they're kind of tied to these commercial, supermarkets via contracts, and they're tied to Monsanto via the seeds and all this stuff, just to really establish total control over the food supply and calories, while they push to ban meat and healthy natural foods and vegetables, and everything is going to be genetically modified or livestock injected with mRNA. And you just can't trust these people. This is the American Heart Association. Procter & Gamble have got, again, a long, nasty history when you look into them. And this has come out just how these studies were done and how they were paying off doctors to say that saturated fat, again, which comes from nature and has been around forever, is all of a sudden causing all these heart attacks. And in fact, it's not these seed oils, which were a relatively new thing produced in chemicals, produced in factories with plenty of chemicals, industrial processes and so on, and telling people it's healthier to eat these than to eat things from nature. So we've got the election coming up now in Australia, where, a bit of a worry. I don't honestly think enough people are awake yet. Most people are still going to vote for either of these two-party systems, and even in the lower parties, there's very few candidates that are going to stand up against this globalist agenda. But it is good to see just the number of clips that have been going around with everyday citizens calling out Albo and our politicians about immigration and the cost of living crisis, and why are you flooding us with migrants. And they're talking about healthcare, but it's only going to be harder to see a doctor or harder to get in for surgeries and scans and all these huge waiting times we have if you keep flooding the country with more immigrants. And young people are really getting sick of it. So continue to call this out, guys, on the campaign trail. We need this to become part of the normal thinking for people to wake up that these people aren't going to change anything. They're not going to help you. And as Matt Barry says here, 2.5 million temporary visas in a country, we've got so few rental vacancies, and yet the government's now advertising for more unskilled labor to come in from Mexico. I spoke about how all the Indian visas in Canada and the US are set to expire, and the number of people that could move here. And I've got nothing against all those people. I've got nothing but love for everyone from every country if you're a good person. But we just can't handle this at the moment in this cost of living crisis, homelessness rising. Basically impossible to buy a house or even rent now, even if you're on an average middle income. So I have to put an end to this madness. This is former Australian Senator here, Len Harris, just taking the government to court over these land titles in Australia, no longer given their paper deeds. And this all ties into BlackRock and everyone wanting to come out, Bill Gates buy up our farmland, our homes, and again, in a situation where they might lose this database or it gets hacked or the power goes out, whatever it is, and they can say, oh, well, we don't really know who owns what now. We're going to have to take everyone's house and just redistribute it, and we'll pay you the cost of the house or the valuation we think is fair. All these things that they're making possible to take away your assets from you, even if you do own them. And the other playbook here that I've warned about is how they're slowly banning parts of nature where you can get out. So many people live in these concrete jungles now, and it's their relaxation to get out in nature again, which I think is amazing for you, to get away from all the chaos and the noise and spend some time in nature. Can't recommend it enough. But we got the news this week that they're shutting down Kakadu National Park and all these other places. So I think they're really, it's sad to see something that we, again, wake people up, share these videos, get this message out. They're going to ban people from leaving and going out in nature as they push us towards these 15-minute smart cities and complete control. This is another sad story here where we have hundreds of ancient human remains that are secretly being buried in a desert 1,000 k's out of Sydney. I spoke about those really old skulls last week and how they're trying to cover up our history. We've seen some interesting things going on under the pyramids in plenty of other places, Göbekli Tepe. There's a real push now, I think, to try and cover up our true past and push people. It's easier to control people and to push them into this new system if they don't realize maybe how great things were in the past or the technologies that we had in the past, our true past. So this is 31 states now that are looking to ban this, chemtrails, geoengineering, atmosphere manipulation, all this stuff that people thought was wild conspiracy theory. Again, we now have the legislation from 31 states, and we continue to see these crazy weather events, huge fires in California still when they're having, a really cold conditions. It just makes no sense. And now we're getting these crazy earthquakes. So I hope everyone is safe in Thailand. I hope we don't see these trends continue and being blamed on climate change and so on. But wild times, feels like we're living in a movie. Never been more important to understand what's going on and how to protect your wealth as they push towards this new system, guys. So head over to Nuggets News. You can sign up for our free newsletter, all our crypto research, and of course our high net worth services. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Smash that like button, share these videos around. I'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.